galactic.
Hey everybody, it's starting to get a little bit cooler out there. Summer's now over, and it's finally football season, and there's that predictably annual chill in the air, which reminds us that things are about to change. The party's over. The party of being warm. I like being warm. I know some of you don't. I remember working outside one day and it was like 80 degrees. 80 degrees and sunny. And somebody asked me, how can you stand working outside in this? And I was like, wait, what? How can I stand working outside in perfect weather? That's how much differently I view weather than other people do. Like, what's perfect for me is what other people hate. And if you've listened to the show much, you probably know that I just moved to Utah from Florida. And when winter arrives, I'm going to have to go back out and venture into that cold, snowy weather again for the first time in almost 2 years. And I really don't even know how well I'm going to be able to deal with it after being so warm and happy for so long. At least for now, though, it's absolutely beautiful here in Salt Lake City. But, as I've talked about in the past, there was just something about living in Florida in the wintertime where I considered it this huge emotional advantage to be warm all the time. And I started to notice that after a while, because I had moved from Ohio to Florida, I'd stopped thinking about how cold it was up north because the cold was no longer my reality. And when you don't live in other people's realities, there can be this tendency to almost forget that the other ones even exist at all. Like you can almost cognitively put those other realities on like a intellectual back burner in some ways. I had this incredible friend who I met with every Saturday morning in Jacksonville, and she was a psychologist. She was a friend, not my therapist. I just want to make that clear. She grew up in Chicago, so her and I were completely on the same page when it came to cold weather and health. But I think one morning I ventured too far down that rabbit hole, and for her at least, when I said, do you ever forget that while we live in a tropical paradise, it's currently brutally cold back home in Chicago or Ohio? And we forget that in the same way that, we live in this place of peace and comfort while there's a war going on in Ukraine. Or that we get to live in nice neighborhoods and there are other neighborhoods out there where there's constant crime and like extreme poverty. And in that same way where we can just kind of forget that those other worlds exist, when you're in Florida, you can forget that it's cold anywhere else. And she turned to me and she goes, Caesar, it is way too early in the morning for this kind of crap. I mean, she was a child psychologist, right? So she was dealing with actual problems every day. And so for me to bring that to her on Saturday morning was just kind of too much for her. And then, of course, she said, I'm just kidding with you. But I think there was a good point there. That's like, it's just like, Caesar, your constant thinking and theories can be a little too much sometimes. I remember I took one of my scripts to Reddit like a few months ago. And I just kind of wanted to see what people thought before I turned it into a podcast. And one of the people responded and said, overthink things too much? Because I kind of as a snarky response. I was like, yeah, I do. I have a friend who asked me, how do you come up with your ideas for your podcast? And it's like, you don't want to be in my head. It's just always there. And it's dying to get out. It kind of sucks to be in there sometimes. It's just like, turn it off, Like I talked about in the last episode, it's like, why? What motivates people to do their podcast even though they're not successful like this one isn't? Like, why do people create art, It's in there and it needs to get out, Anyways. I just kind of tend to be this cold-hearted pragmatist by nature who tends to fear very little. But every once in a while, it's not very often, and I'll explain why. I'll smoke marijuana. I'll smoke weed. And I become this huge scaredy cat. I become scared of everything. I was once high and I was listening to Dua Lipa, and I had to turn it off because listening to Dua Lipa scared me. I'm like, the drums are too loud. That's how absurd some of my fears can be when I'm using marijuana. The way that I would personally describe the marijuana experience, at least for me, is that when you're a kid, you're always scared. Like, babies always have much more emotion than maybe an adult would. Like, babies cry a lot because they're scared a lot. And babies laugh a lot because they're happy a lot. And the emotions are far more extreme for a baby than it would be for an adult, because as we get older, we build these walls, like Pink Floyd, The Wall. Tear down the wall. Tear down the wall. Where we build up these defenses over time and we become comfortably numb. And for me, marijuana tears down those walls, which can be terrifying because suddenly I'm, not only can I feel the great joys of being a kid again, but I can also feel those great fears. Like, for example, when I'm high, I think about things like how I can hear my own heartbeat. And that makes me think about how this one organ in my body has been working flawlessly for so many years at this point. And all it has to do is stop working for just a few seconds and I'm absolutely screwed. Which is truly a fascinating and terrifying concept to think about, but we don't think about it very often. Because if we did, we'd probably be terrified all the time. Yes, we all understand the concept of how this works, and we all know that one day our hearts will indeed stop beating. And while, at least for now, our hearts work all the time for us without us even thinking about it, we are forced to kind of mentally take that fact for granted, and we put the concept on some back burner in the back of our minds so that we can just function without living in constant terror. But when I smoke marijuana, all of those types of concepts are once again placed on the front burner where I am forced to deal with them. And as you might imagine, this isn't really very fun for me to think about this stuff. So like I said, I really don't especially enjoy doing it very often. But being afraid and exploring these types of thoughts for a little while can have potential benefits for me. The last time I did it was a couple of years ago. But it was this catalyst for huge changes in my life. It's probably why I lost 40 pounds. It's probably why I moved to Florida, then to Utah, and all these things that made my life so much more interesting and better. Back in September of 2020, I guess basically at the height of the pandemic, I drove a few hours up to Michigan from Ohio where I lived at the time, and I wanted to buy marijuana legally. It's legal in Michigan and it's not in Ohio. And I went camping while I was there since I was traveling, and I brought a cooler of food with me as well. And I smoked some of the marijuana and I was a little bit high, and I went to my cooler and I got an apple and like a really small bag of Doritos, like the one that costs like 50 cents. Not even the big small one, the little one. And then I ate the apple, and I could feel that it was giving me energy. It made me feel good. It was this good thing. And then I ate the small bag of chips, and I could just feel it bogging me down. I remember thinking as I was high, this thing, the apple, it is good. And this other thing, the Doritos, are bad. What an extremely simple concept that was, right? Good job, genius, right? I'm glad you figured that out. We all know that. But in this case, I had to be high. I had to have smoked weed to truly understand it. And this concept has stuck with me ever since. A makes my life better, and B makes it worse. So in the future, when faced with these two options, you should definitely do A. Right, dummy? And this all came from a place of fear, And in addition to that, I started texting my loved ones, and for the first time in a while, because we were in the middle of the pandemic, I started arranging get-togethers that I hadn't done in a while because I realized, I missed them. And again, it came from this place of fear that I don't normally have because I built up these walls. Tear down the wall. Tear down the wall. I took a notebook with me and I wrote down everything I was thinking about during this time. And one thing I wrote, and I put it in huge letters because I knew it was going to be important later, and it completely changed my life in drastic ways. And it said, if you can't become more self-disciplined, you will never be happy again. When I got home, I tore that page out of my notebook and I got some tape and I hung it on the wall so that I was right by my door, so that I was forced to see it every day when I left. This part right here, if you've listened to this podcast before, you've heard it probably multiple times already, but bear with me for just a second because it won't take long. But just a few months later, and it was 100% a byproduct of me going to Michigan and partaking in these wonderful experiences. But basically in December of 2020, just a few months later, I just started to realize how important it was to have kept that journal for that weekend. And so I basically just decided to start keeping a journal every day. And I've written in it every day since then. For the first few months that I kept a journal, at the end of the month, I would record it to audio, and then I'd force myself to listen to it. And it was just awful to listen to. Because I found that I was complaining so much, and I wasn't actually making any attempts at solving any of the issues which were making me miserable. And I couldn't stand hearing about it anymore, so it forced me to start changing my life for the better. And for the most part, life has been pretty awesome ever since. I went from being miserable to being pretty happy. And happiness is this weird thing because, all right, I'm going to go off on a tangent here, and this is not in the script. Why did I work so hard at writing a script this weekend when I was going to venture off of it so much? Sometimes I think I struggle to know the difference between contentment and happiness. And I think a good example of this would be, these days I feel like I'm basically happy all the time. But then I'll go to a party or something or to an amusement park and I come back and I'm like, oh, that was so amazing. I should do that more often, Like it makes me so happy. But it makes me think, oh, wait, I thought I was already happy. Wait, is this feeling of euphoria after going to a party or to an amusement park, is that true happiness? And what I normally feel as happiness is actually just contentment? It's way too early in the morning for this crap. She didn't say crap. She used the other word. But like I was saying before I got off script, life has basically just mostly been going on this upward trajectory ever since for me. And while I don't exactly enjoy smoking weed because I don't actually enjoy being scared, I hate being scared, it completely changed my life for the better. And having this knowledge, I am completely shocked that this thing, marijuana, is illegal anywhere. Because it has these amazing benefits that could potentially change people's lives. And I know what you're thinking.
Caesar, aren't you conservative?
No, not really. I try to tell you guys. This is a pretty liberal perspective for me to be pro-marijuana, right? It's wild that people try to put your ideas into the conservative liberal box, right? If you're an intelligent, open-minded person who is willing to explore different thoughts, you can't exist within that box. I have some other liberal ideals too. I don't share them very often because I don't want to be associated with the crazies. A lot of y'all liberals are, 2023 liberals, you're all insane. When I was young, they were the proponents of free speech, and it was the conservatives who wanted to squash open discussion. And it is not that way anymore. It is the opposite. And it makes me think of, some people talk about how it was actually the Democrats who were pro-slavery, and people don't understand how that works because Democrats in 2023 are, quote unquote, the party who is, quote unquote, pro-black, pro-minorities, And it's the evil conservatives who want to keep minorities down, right? And why did I get so far off script here? This wasn't supposed to be a political episode. But people say that the reason why that weird shift happened was that the Democrat Party and the Republican Party actually did this huge flip at some point, where the people who usually have liberal ideologies somehow flipped and took on the conservative ideologies. And I was listening to this show, James O'Brien's Mystery Hour, out of London, out of Britain. And they were wondering the same kind of thing too. They're like, why is it that everywhere in the world, and I should probably look this up before I say it. I can't remember exactly. I think conservatives are red and liberals are blue. No. In the United States, conservative states are red and liberal states are blue. But everywhere else in the world, it's the opposite. And when I was listening to the show, James O'Brien's Mystery Hour, that was one of the questions. The show is about people call in and ask questions and other people call in and answer those questions. And one of the questions was, why is the United States different than Britain? Why are we the opposite? And the person who called in said, it's because in the United States they flipped. They flipped parties. One party somehow flipped over to the other party's ideologies. And I can't help but wonder, how did that happen? I think it was in the 60s or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But I'm like, how does that happen? But then I've witnessed it in my own lifetime. It flipped again. When I was a kid, liberals were the people who fought for sexual freedom and free speech. And somehow the progressives, the liberals, they have become the ones who want to censor things. And inexplicably, it's the conservatives, the Bible beaters, who want free speech in 2023, and it makes no sense whatsoever that flip happened again. All right, wasn't I supposed to be following an outline here? Why do I get off on these tangents? I can't tell if it makes the show better or worse. But back to my liberal ideologies, that pot should be legal for everybody. It is baffling to me that such a simple concept as A is good and B is bad required me getting into an altered state in order for me to truly understand. But that's what it was. It did. It required me to do that. But just like with the heartbeat thing, I already understood the concept. I already knew it going in. It's a simple concept. It's a simple thing to grasp. But mentally, emotionally, I allowed myself to put it on some back burner in the back of my mind. In preparation for this show, I looked up the concept of cognitive dissidence and what that actually means. And I didn't actually use it for the show because I'm not sure it lines up exactly. But one of the ideas when I looked it up was that effort is one of the sources of cognitive dissidence. And I started to think, is it the effort which it requires to make our lives better, the thing that actually discourages us from going through with healthy habits? Is eating healthy really all that difficult? Does choosing to eat the apple actually require more effort than eating the Doritos? Especially if they are both sitting in front of me already prepared to eat. The apple's there, the Doritos are there. I can choose either one. The answer is no, it doesn't take more effort to eat the apple than it does the Doritos, but for some reason, it's still harder to choose the apple over the Doritos. Why? Maybe you don't like Doritos, so you don't agree with this example, but just insert whatever unhealthy thing tempts you versus whatever healthy thing doesn't. I don't know, like maybe you love cheesecake, but you hate broccoli, and if you had to make the choice, you'd choose cheesecake every time. Or maybe it's water versus Mountain Dew. Water versus soda, you know. But my point is that we all know that Mountain Dew actually makes you less healthy and that drinking water makes you more healthy, right? It's just a matter of taking that thought off the back burner in our minds and placing this knowledge in plain sight right in front of us where we are forced to deal with it. And that's what marijuana does for me. It's what marijuana forces me to deal with. Like, what truly matters to you more? That you drink a Mountain Dew? That you do this unhealthy thing that gives you moments of pleasure? Or that in the big picture, you find happiness in not being overweight? It's pleasure in the moment versus big picture happiness. Which thing is more important to you, Caesar? Do you want to be overweight? I mean, I think the answer for all of us is no. And yet it is a nationwide epidemic that is spreading to other countries. If you don't want to be overweight, you know what to do, right? How much does it matter? Why do you care so much about Mountain Dew that you are willing to sacrifice your own health in order to be addicted to a product that you have no obligation to be addicted to? I don't actually like Mountain Dew. I'm just using that as an example. I have other soda addictions. But where did that addiction even start? I was drinking Pepsi when I was like 2 or 3 years old. I have a scar on my finger because this is how old I am. I have a scar on my finger that I only know about because people have told me about it. Because when I was a little kid, I cut myself on a Pepsi bottle. Because I was drinking Pepsi at an age so young that I don't remember getting a scar. My entire life, soda and beer and all these extremely unhealthy things have been on the TV constantly through advertising. These are the places where these addictions start, where these unhealthy habits start. We're just constantly inundated with these unhealthy suggestions our entire lives. It's from little kid age. That's where they get to us. And as adults, we should eventually come to the conclusion that, oh, these things that I wanted as a little kid that people were trying to sell to me, they are not good for me. Don't I want to be healthy? Don't we all want to be healthy? We know what to do. We know how to solve it. We have the information available to us. We know that the apple makes us healthier and that the Doritos bog us down. Back in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, I was in this miserable place, both mentally and physically, just like many of us were. It happened to us, a lot of us, except for that one dude I talked about in a previous episode who moved to Hawaii. That SOB. But in 2020, I was stuck inside a house in Cleveland in the wintertime. And if you've ever been to Cleveland, it's very, very cold and there's nowhere to escape. It unlocked this multitude of horribly new, unhealthy habits for me, as well as this like unprecedented lack of self-control that I hadn't had before, at least in a while. Because, hey, I can't go out and see my friends, so why not just stay home and watch Netflix and then drink too much soda and beer and too much food, right? And these were all things that made me less happy and less healthy. One thing that I've come to understand, though, is that using marijuana, smoking weed, whatever, doesn't really have the same effects on everybody. The best description that I've heard for it, and I don't remember where I heard this. It was either a blog or a YouTube video or something like that, but some important information, some important things are really hard to find, and you just kind of have to dig for them. and this was one of those things, but this blog or YouTube video or whatever it was basically said that marijuana will amplify whatever emotions you already have. The example that they used, like as an analogy for smoking weed, was the scene in the movie Star Wars. I don't even remember which episode it was, but where Luke Skywalker went into the marsh and Darth Vader was there, but Darth Vader wasn't actually there because it was all in Luke's head. And Luke actually brought Vader into the swamp with him in his own mind. And they were suggesting on this blog or whatever that marijuana does the exact same thing. So their suggestion was that if you're already an anxious train wreck going into smoking pot, that anxiety is going to get amplified. And from my experience, that is exactly what happens to me when I get high. And like I've said already a couple times, I don't actually want to be more scared and anxious. I don't actually want to see Darth Vader in the marsh. So, as you might imagine, I don't really want to get high very often because it's scary. But there was a reason why Yoda sent Luke into the marsh, so that he could more clearly see who he actually was. And that's exactly why I drove up to Michigan to smoke weed back in September of 2020. Because I was miserable and I needed to find out why. I've talked to a lot of other people who smoke weed and they don't have this experience at all. And I am horribly jealous of those of you who feel relaxed when you get high. Because that is the opposite experience that I have when I smoke weed. For me, when I smoke weed, it's like I'm my own really mean, really blunt psychologist who likes to tell it like it is. And I'd become this miserable person in 2020. And I knew that it was time to go travel to meet my inner mean, blunt psychologist who perfectly understands that A makes my life better and that B makes it worse. And I needed that inner therapist to explain in order to improve my own life. Marijuana was the gateway to happiness and health for me, both physically and mentally. And it makes me wonder, why would anybody want to make that illegal? Why would anybody want to keep the ability to make yourself happy out of the hands of people? Why is marijuana is so taboo? I've heard a lot of people say that they had the same mentally healing experience with psychedelic mushrooms too. And while I've never done those myself, I probably would. I probably would if I had access to them and they were legal. It's weird to think about how something like a marijuana experience could just kind of wake me up intellectually to the point where afterwards, I absolutely understand the whole concept of A is good and B is bad, so just do A instead of B, dummy. I understood that concept better. And it makes no sense whatsoever that I did not before. Like, some people have a health scare where they almost die. And they have this awakening where they realize, oh no, it's time to change my ways. Maybe by smoking pot and being scared, I actually bypassed the future health scare that would have inevitably happened if I hadn't smoked weed that day and felt that same fear. And again, you could say, Caesar, this is a you issue. But it's not. This is a nationwide epidemic. Okay, I just looked it up on Forbes. 4 million people die each year as a result of obesity, according to the World Health Organization. The World Obesity Federation, I didn't even know that exists, predicts that by 2030, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men will have obesity. Why am I quoting the WHO, who completely ignored obesity during the pandemic? Currently, more people have obesity than underweight in every region of the world, with the exception of sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, revealing how it's a common health problem in both developed and developing countries. The obesity rate in the U.S. continued to climb during the COVID-19 pandemic, increasing by 3% between March 2020 and March 2021. Oh, and here's where the WHO steps in with logic. Obesity increases the risk of severe illness from COVID-19, tripling one's risk of hospitalization. Why didn't we hear about any of this from you, WHO, during the pandemic? Medical costs for people with obesity in the U.S. tend to be 30 to 40% higher than those for people without obesity. Based on data collected between 2017 and 2020, 41.9% of adults in the U.S. have obesity. And obesity and being overweight are not the same. You can be overweight without being obese, and there are different levels of obesity. Worldwide, more than 1 billion people have obesity. 650 million adults, 340 million adolescents, and 39 million children. I recently went into a restaurant with a guy I know who struggles with obesity. And while we were at the restaurant, he started talking about how he has to lose weight for an upcoming surgery. He was talking about methodology for losing weight. And I said that it's basically a math equation, that we as adult males should probably try to aim somewhere around 2,000 calories per day. Because I've looked this up in the past, And yes, I know it's different for everybody, but our goal as adult males should be to try to consume somewhere around 2,000 calories per day or less. And if you consume more than 2,000 calories per day, then you have to counter that by burning more calories in order to reach your goal. But ideally, you do both. You'd consume less than 2,000 calories, and then in addition to losing those 2,000 calories, you would burn maybe like 500 more if you wish to lose that weight. This is a math equation, and it's kind of how the body works. And while it isn't exactly the same for each person, the general concept is basically the same no matter who you are. You need to burn more calories and consume less calories if you want to lose weight. And again, there are exceptions. My most recent ex-girlfriend was a very skinny woman, and she ate horribly. Like, we'd go out and she'd like, oh, I want macaroni and cheese. She ate like a freaking kid. One day she said, I love vodka cream sauce on top of pasta. So I was like, okay, well, let's learn to make it together. And once I got the recipe, I looked at it and it was like heavy cream. And in addition to the heavy cream, it was like cream cheese and like everything in it was unhealthy. It's no wonder it's so good. I can't eat this way, It was so good. We did a good job of making it, but holy crap. She always wanted me to eat with her, and I had to explain to her, this doesn't work for me like it works for you. If I were to eat all the same things that you ate, I would blow up like a balloon. She obviously had a much higher metabolism than I did, and she struggled with understanding that I couldn't do what she did. Weight gain is something that I struggle with myself, and while I'm far from perfect at it, I've lost a lot of weight enough times to know how to do it when I need to, And when I'm focused on it, I'm actually quite good at losing weight. So I know a lot about this subject matter, or at least from a perspective of how it pertains to me. Anyways, at some point in the conversation at that restaurant with that guy who's dealing with obesity, I asked him to look around the restaurant. A huge percentage of those people who were there were overweight. I said, restaurants like these don't care about your health. And their goal is to lure people in with this delicious food. Health be damned. In recent months, I've been spending a lot of time hiking in the mountains here in Salt Lake City. And I told the guy who I was having lunch with, you don't see too many overweight people up there hiking in the mountains. My point was that you have two options in life. You can do A, you can go hiking in the mountains, which would make your life better. Or you can do B, going to a restaurant, which will make your life worse, ultimately. Yes, you get a little bit of immediate gratification, but in the long run, life won't be as good. Just like with the apple and the Doritos in Michigan. Tear down the wall. Tear down the wall. This dude started getting furious with me when I said that, after I said that. Why are you attacking me? He said. And I'm like, I'm not attacking you. I'm just pointing out that one thing makes our lives better and the other thing makes our lives worse. So if we want better results, we have to do the things that make our life better. And he said, no, you're attacking me. He said, I just wanted to go to a restaurant and enjoy a meal. And now you're making me feel bad that I even went in the first place. This baffled me, and it shockingly turned into him hurling insults at me about what he perceived to be my shortcomings. For example, he said, you don't make as much money as I do, which is funny because it was irrelevant to the conversation. And honestly, I'm just not a person who cares a lot about money. And if I did care a lot about money, I would probably make more money. And it's just a fact that he makes more money than I do. So why would that be hurtful to me? It is a fact. I know that he meant it to be hurtful, but because he was hurt. But again, I am a pragmatist, not an emotional person. Only one of the two of us in that situation was trying to have an argument and hurt the other one. This dude was obviously offended, but I don't really think that I said anything that was offensive because facts and information aren't offensive. I was just stating the truth. People in that restaurant were mostly overweight, and people who go hiking in the mountains are mostly not overweight. These are just observations. These are facts. And he was offended by facts. If you are unable to observe facts and information without being offended by them, then you're probably screwed in trying to reach a difficult goal, because you need facts and information to successfully achieve any difficult goal. How else would you do it? You need to know how to overcome obstacles in order to actually overcome them. Because your current mindset is obviously not the answer. There needs to be change in order for you to change. Also, recently I was asked to spend the day with a lady who I'd met before, and she seemed like a perfectly fine person when I met her in the past, but I'd never actually spent an entire day with her before, and you really never get to know somebody until you're forced to spend a significant amount of time with them, right? On this day, she got this text message from her son. Apparently, the kid is very obese. And she said that the other kids at school pick on him because of his obesity. She had packed a bag of potato chips with him in his lunch on that day, and apparently at some point he had to leave the classroom for some reason, which she tried to explain to me, which I didn't really care about. But when he got back to class, his potato chips were missing, which I guess he had left on his desk or whatever. And he started demanding that all of the other kids around him allow him to search their backpacks because he wanted to find out who stole his snack. The teacher started getting annoyed with this woman's son, and he sent the kid to the principal's office, where the kid texted the mother to say that he was being bullied. The mother, who I was hanging out with at the time, started raising hell, and she started making phone calls to the guidance counselor, sending texts, whatever, and she demanded like this in-person meeting with the teacher and the counselor and her son all together because nobody messes with Mama Bear, right? And she was so proud to say that she's not the type of person to put up with her son being bullied. And I sat there and I thought, I'm struggling with this logic here. Your son is being bullied because he's overweight, and your solution was to send a bag of potato chips with him to school, which would make his life worse instead of, maybe send the apple, which would make it better. You know that your son is being bullied because he's overweight, but you sent something with him to school that would make him more overweight. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And that's what this whole ordeal was about. Lady, you are probably a well-meaning, loving mother, but you are horrible at this. What on earth is wrong with some of you? You've been listening to The Great Beginner Galactic. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the show. The Great Big Intergalactic can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, Apple iTunes, and anywhere else that podcasts can be heard. If social media is your thing, you can follow the program on Facebook or Twitter. If you enjoy the show, upvote, share, like, and subscribe. Whenever and wherever those things can be done. If you'd like to send feedback, the easiest way to do that is to email the show at tgbiuniverse@gmail.com, TGBI as in the Great Big Intergalactic, or you can leave a voicemail at 216-200-7940. Contributions could include written feedback, audio submissions, voicemails, or potentially even live guests. It was great having you today, and see you next time.